Hey, I'm Amy Cornell. I'm your Texas broker with Front Real Estate, here to help you real estate better. All right, so get some questions sometimes about how do I set up pricing for the seller, and what is like this BAC and transaction fee? What does that mean when I'm setting up my pricing? So I wanted to show you on a listing agreement, and again, we're in the state of Texas, so this may be different if you're in another area. And let me preface this with, all of this may be different based on what brokerage you're with, but this is what in general, and this is what my folks are doing. So this is a listing agreement. So you can kind of see it's that exclusive right to sell. And so down here on page 2, so we have our listing price that was set right up here, then term, and then broker compensation. And so when earned and payable, seller will pay broker blank % of the sales price. And then on this one, there is a transaction fee. So you might say, well, what is a transaction fee? Why would I charge the consumer a transaction fee? Well, again, you have, and this goes for my brokerage, so again, check with your brokerage, but you have the power to charge the consumer what you feel like is commensurate for your services. And so for this one, this agent decided, hey, I am spending a lot of money on marketing. I'm spending a lot of time on getting this all ready and those kind of things. And so instead of just charging a percentage, and it could have been 6, 7, 8, 9%, something like that, could have done it that way. But instead they said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and stay with a more traditional percentage, but I'm going to add to it a transaction fee. They don't have to clarify what that is. They don't have to do anything as long as the consumer agrees to it and believes that they are paying a good value for those services. If the consumer wants to know more information about it, you as an agent really need to make sure that you're able to explain to them what your unique value proposition is, or your UVP, so that way they understand why you're charging a transaction fee in addition to the percentage. But as long as you can, it doesn't have to be detailed out here. You don't have to have anything specific as far as this is why I'm charging a transaction fee. You don't have to write in any conditional statements, but this also gives you a lot of flexibility. Remember, this document is an agreement between the broker and the seller. And so whatever the broker and the seller agree on, most of the time the agent is going to be the one who's really negotiating that and then signing it on behalf of the broker per the brokerage agreement. That's okay. This is however y'all structure it, it's totally okay. But keep in mind that number, the percentage, that is going to be split between the listing broker and the buyer's broker. And so if you keep scrolling down in the Texas form, and this is the one that's provided by not Trek, but the Texas Realtors, down in this section, it has cooperation with other brokers. And then it says broker will allow other brokers to show the property to prospective buyers. Broker will offer to pay the other broker at a fee as described below if the other broker procures a buyer that purchases the property. And then it breaks down if it is if the broker represents the buyer, if the other broker was a subagent, and then if it was a non-MLS participant. Now, what's the difference between those? Well, if it is 8A1, where the buyer's broker is representing the buyer, that means, right, they have a buyer representation agreement, and that buyer representation agreement clarifies the agency relationship between the buyer and the buyer's broker. If they do not have a buyer representation agreement, then by default, they are a subagent of the seller, and that's where this 8A2 would come into effect, and they would not be eligible to receive a 3% commission. They would only be eligible to receive a 1.5% commission. Now, in this scenario where the seller had already agreed to 6% commission, if the buyer's agent was a subagent, then that means the listing broker would get 4.5% and the subagent would get 1.5%, or the subagent's brokerage. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. The starting commission doesn't change depending on which one of these. But I'll tell you, what we see most often is that the buyer's broker does have an agency relationship, and they are really representing that buyer under a buyer representation agreement. I will tell you, for our brokerage, that's part of why we go in and check every single time on our compliance side to make sure that we have all of that in place, to make sure that everything is clarified from an agency perspective, and that the consumer really understands that we are not acting as a subagent for the seller, but we are acting as full representation for the buyer. Okay, so this is great that this is in this document, right? But this is a more of a private document between the seller and the buyer. The seller and the listing broker. So how does the buyer's agent know what commission is being offered, those kind of things? So that would be back over here on your MLS provider. So this is our MLS sheet for this property. And so when you scroll down here at in the agent section that is private information for just our MLS participants, when you sign your MLS participant information, it says if you make an offer in MLS for a buyer agent commission or a sub-agent commission, then that is like your brokerage saying, yes, I confirm that I have a listing agreement and I am willing to pay for a ready, willing, and able buyer these percentages. Okay, so you've got to make sure, and again, we're checking that from a compliance perspective, so you may hear from us, but you've got to make sure that your listing agreement covers at minimum the amount here, because that listing agreement is how you're going to get the funding from the seller and then to pay the buyer's agent here. Okay, so you need to make sure that all of those line up. That amount in page 1 of the listing agreement, the buyer's agent commission in the listing agreement, and then it needs to match here with this BAC. So BAC is buyer agent commission, so that would be a represented buyer. Hey, I'm going to pay 3% to any buyer's broker bringing a represented buyer who's going to buy this property. If you do not have a buyer rep, hey, you only get 1.5. And I see these at all sorts of different numbers. Sometimes I see them both at 3. Sometimes I see it at 0 and 3, all sorts of different things. But just know that's the difference between those two. The other thing to know about the BAC is that if as a consumer, let's say that I'm, hold on just a second. Okay, so let's say that I am representing a buyer and I go to show a property and it has a BAC of 2%, but I have already executed a buyer representation agreement for 3%. And, I have performed services believing that I was going to get 3%. All of my unique value proposition had been based on a 3% commission. And now, per this, it is saying that the listing broker is only offering a 2% BAC. Well, for me, I want to have that talk with the consumer before we ever go into that house and say, hey, just so you know, they're only offering a 2%, but our buyer representation has us at 3%. So we would need to modify whatever offer you want to make on this property to make sure that that additional percentage is covered. So we could use paragraph 12A1B, where the seller is paying a portion of your closing costs, and we could add 1% there so that way then you're not having to come out of pocket for my services. We could add some language into special provisions. Maybe the title company attorney could help us with that, or let me know if you need some help with that. That says, hey, the seller is going to pay a portion of their sales price towards that, because that wasn't contemplated in the original listing agreement. However you want to do that is totally fine. The buyer can also choose to just pay that 1% at closing as well. But however you do that, just know it's not just as easy as changing the number on page 9 of the contract. A lot of times we'll see that like, oh, see, I put in 3, so they agreed to 3. Well, not really. That's really not doing it. What is in MLS is what really survives. And so that's what we need to make sure we're honoring, and then that we're adjusting the offer to make sure that it's meeting whatever your requirements are on that side as well. I hope that makes sense more from a listing agreement side, buyer rep side. I know it's a lot to kind of wrap your head around, but once you get used to it, you're fine. If I can answer any questions or anything, definitely let me know. Again, this is all based on state of Texas stuff. So if you're in another state, it really could be a totally different deal. And again, this is all negotiable. All of this is totally negotiable. And so it's just about making sure that you're doing the right thing for your business and for your clients. We'll talk to you soon.